It was a normal Thursday morning in the middle of autumn. The city streets outside were wet from a light drizzle that had started before sunrise. People hurried past with umbrellas, their shoes tapping quickly on the pavement. Inside the tall glass office building, the hum of computers and the soft chatter of employees filled the air. In the far corner of the 12th floor, sitting quietly at a small desk near the window, was a young woman who most people barely noticed. She wasn't the kind to raise her voice in meetings or crack jokes in the break room. She kept her head down, did her work, and left on time every day. Her colleagues only knew her as the quiet new intern. She didn't mind that. She had never been the center of attention, not in school, not at home, and definitely not here. The job was simple. Enter numbers, double-check reports, and file documents. Most people thought it was boring work, but she didn't. She liked details, and she liked making sure everything lined up perfectly. That morning, as she sipped her tea and waited for her computer to load, she opened a set of financial records she had been assigned the day before. It was a normal task. At first, everything looked fine. The numbers were neat, the transactions clear. But then, halfway through, she spotted something that made her pause. A payment large enough to stand out had been sent to a small company overseas. Nothing too strange in itself, but the same amount had been sent again the very next day. That was unusual. She scrolled back further and saw it had happened before, identical amounts, transferred in patterns that didn't make sense. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She clicked into another set of files, the ones linked to the transaction. There, buried deep in the folder, were emails between two senior employees. They weren't openly suspicious, no threats, no clear wrongdoing, but the language was odd, almost as if they were speaking in code. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just how they worked. But something didn't feel right. Her father, who had been an accountant all his life, once told her, "Numbers tell a story. If something doesn't fit, it's because the story isn't true." That thought wouldn't leave her. She knew she was just an intern. She had no authority, no real place to question the people at the top. If she was wrong, she could embarrass herself, or worse, lose her position entirely. But if she was right, and she stayed quiet, the damage could be huge. For the next few hours, she kept glancing at the clock, torn between speaking up and staying silent. Her mind went back and forth like a seesaw. What if she was overthinking it? What if someone else had already noticed? By lunch, her decision was still hanging in the air. She barely touched her food, pushing it around with her fork while her colleagues chatted about weekend plans. They didn't notice her distracted state. She had always been the quiet one. Finally, in the middle of the afternoon, she decided she couldn't just ignore it. But she also knew she didn't want to create a scene or send a bold email that could easily be dismissed. Instead, she reached for a small piece of paper from her notebook and began to write, her hand trembling slightly. It wasn't a long message, just one short line. "Please check the offshore transaction files. Something is wrong." She stared at the sentence for a moment, wondering if it was too vague. But she didn't want to say more, not yet. If she was wrong, at least she wouldn't have accused anyone directly. The question now was, who should she give it to? Her direct manager? The finance team? Or someone higher? Her eyes drifted to the large office at the end of the hall, where the company's CEO worked. She had seen him in passing a few times, tall, confident, the kind of person who seemed like he carried the weight of 100 decisions every day. People said he was strict but fair, and that he had rebuilt the company after a major loss a few years back. She didn't know why, but something told her the note should go to him. Maybe it was because the issue seemed too serious to get lost in layers of middle management. Maybe it was because her instincts said he would actually read it. When most of the office was distracted by an afternoon meeting, she stood up, the note folded neatly in her hand. Her heart pounded as she walked across the quiet hallway toward the corner office. She could see through the glass door that the CEO was at his desk, reading something on his screen. She hesitated just for a second, and then opened the door halfway. He looked up briefly, his expression polite but curious. Without saying a word, she placed the folded paper on the corner of his desk. He frowned slightly, as if surprised, but she didn't wait for him to ask anything. She gave a small nod, turned, and walked out, her pulse still racing. Back at her desk, she sat down and tried to act normal. She opened her spreadsheet again, though her mind was far from numbers now. She didn't know if the CEO would take her notes seriously, or if he would even read it. Maybe it would get tossed aside. But deep down, she felt a small wave of relief. She had done her part. She had spoken up, quietly, in her own way, and now it was out of her hands. She didn't know it yet, but that tiny folded note would set off a chain of events that would change not only the future of the company, but her own life as well. The rest of the afternoon moved slowly. She kept her head down, typing and clicking, pretending nothing had happened. But every few minutes, her mind wandered back to that folded note sitting on the CEO's desk. Did he read it yet? Did he think it was strange? Or worse, did he think she was just an overcautious intern wasting his time? By the time the clock reached 5, most people had already started packing up. She took her time, letting others leave first. She didn't want to bump into anyone and risk someone asking, "Hey, what were you doing in the CEO's office?" That was a tension she didn't want. When she finally stepped into the elevator, she felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. The streets outside were still damp, and the smell of rain mixed with the faint scent of coffee drifting from a cafe nearby. She walked home with her hands in her pockets, telling herself to stop worrying. But the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, while she sat at her small kitchen table eating dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a short email from the CEO's assistant. "The CEO would like to meet with you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Tomorrow morning? She barely slept that night, her thoughts tangled with possibilities. Was she in trouble? Did she mess something up? Was this about the note or something else entirely? When she arrived at the office the next day, her heart was already thudding. She went straight to her desk, set down her bag, and tried to breathe. At exactly 8:55, she stood up and made her way to the corner office. The CEO's assistant greeted her politely and ushered her inside. He was there, sitting behind his desk, his expression calm but serious. "Close the door," he said gently. She did, and then stood awkwardly in front of his desk, unsure whether to sit, until he gestured to the chair opposite him. He picked up the folded paper she had left the day before. "This was you?" he asked. She nodded slowly. He leaned back, studying her. "Why did you write this?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "Because I noticed some payments that didn't make sense. Repeated amounts, unusual timing. I thought maybe it was nothing, but it felt wrong." He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his hands resting on the desk. "I didn't know who else to tell," she added. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then he gave a single nod. "You were right to bring this to me." Her stomach loosened slightly at those words. He opened a file on his computer and turned the screen slightly toward her. "I checked the records last night. What you found isn't just strange, it's dangerous. If this had continued for another few weeks, the company could have lost millions." Her eyes widened. She had expected maybe a small error or some minor accounting slip-up, but millions? The CEO's voice was low, as if he didn't want anyone outside to overhear. "I've already involved the internal audit team. We'll get to the bottom of this." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to apologize for getting involved. Another part wanted to ask questions. But instead, she just nodded again. He studied her for a moment longer. "You know, most people would have ignored something like this. They'd think, not my problem. But you noticed, and you acted." Her cheeks grew warm. She didn't know how to respond to praise, especially from someone like him. He gave a small, almost approving smile. "Go on. Get back to work. And thank you." As she left his office, the quiet click of the door behind her felt heavier than it should. She had expected the meeting to be short, maybe even awkward, but now she understood something bigger was happening. That single note had set something in motion. And though she couldn't see the full picture yet, she could feel it. This was only the beginning. The day after their meeting, the office didn't feel the same. From her desk, she noticed subtle changes, people whispering more than usual, a few senior managers walking quickly down the hallway, their faces tense. The CEO's door stayed closed for most of the day, and his assistant seemed busier than ever, shuffling papers and making quiet phone calls. She tried to focus on her own work, but curiosity kept creeping in. She wondered what the CEO had found when he dug deeper into the records. He had said it was dangerous, but how dangerous? And who was behind it? By mid-afternoon, the answer started to take shape. Through the glass walls of the meeting room, she caught glimpses of the CEO sitting with two members of the finance department and someone from a legal team. Their expressions were serious, their heads bent over a stack of printed documents. At one point, the CEO stood up, ran a hand through his hair, and spoke with a sharp, determined tone. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language said enough. This wasn't just a small mistake. Later that day, as she passed the break room, she overheard two employees talking in hushed voices. They found something in the accounts, one whispered. It's bad. Real bad. Who's involved? The other asked. The first one shook his head. Not sure yet, but it's someone high up. She kept walking, not wanting to draw attention to herself. Her heart beat faster. Someone high up? That meant this wasn't just a matter of faulty bookkeeping. This was something deliberate. The next morning, she arrived early, hoping to settle in before the day's tension picked up again. But as she walked past the CEO's office, she noticed he was already there, looking over a thick folder. He glanced up and saw her. "Come in for a moment," he said. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. He gestured for her to sit. "I thought you should know," he began. "You were right about the payments. We've traced them back to an executive who's been here for over 10 years. Her eyes widened. She couldn't believe it. "He's been moving company funds into shell accounts overseas," the CEO continued, carefully, in amounts small enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but over time, it's added up to millions. She felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just fraud, it was betrayal. Someone trusted, someone respected, had been quietly draining the company's resources for years. "We wouldn't have caught it so soon without your note," he said. "If it had gone on much longer, the damage could have been irreversible." She didn't know what to say. It was strange hearing him talk about millions of dollars as if it were a personal wound. But she could see in his eyes that it was more than just money. It was the safety of the people who worked here, the stability of something he had built from the ground up. For a moment, he just looked at her, as if weighing whether to say more. Then he leaned forward slightly. "You should also know, this will get messy. There will be questions, investigations. People will want to know how it started, and how it was found." She nodded slowly, understanding what he wasn't directly saying. Her role in this might not stay a secret forever. "Are you comfortable with that?" he asked. She hesitated, then said softly, "If it's the right thing, yes." The CEO gave a faint smile, one that held both gratitude and something harder to read. "Good. And for the record, you've earned my trust." As she left his office, she realized the weight of those words. Trust from someone like him wasn't given easily. And now, she wasn't just an unnoticed intern anymore. She was part of something far bigger than she'd ever imagined. The office felt different now, almost like there was a thin layer of tension spread over every desk. People avoided eye contact in the hallways. Conversations stopped when someone walked by, and every so often, she'd see 2 or 3 managers huddled together in quiet discussion. But for her, the noise inside her own head was louder than anything happening around her. She had never thought of herself as brave. Growing up, she was the one who stayed quiet in class, the one who let others speak first, the one who hated attention. While other kids rushed to volunteer for school plays or sports teams, she preferred the corner of the library with a book. Her father used to tease her gently about it, saying, "You're like a cat, quiet, but always watching." He had been an accountant, the kind of man who noticed when a single number in a column didn't line up. He believed small details could reveal big truths, and he had taught her the same. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table when she was 12, helping him check receipts for his clients. "Most people don't notice the little things," he told her, "but the little things tell you everything." That habit had followed her into adulthood. She didn't speak much, but she saw things, patterns, shifts, changes, that others overlooked. Most of the time, it didn't matter. But this time, it had changed everything. In the days that followed, the CEO spoke to her more than he ever had before. It wasn't always about the fraud case. Sometimes it was about the weather, or the book he noticed on her desk, or how she liked her tea. At first, she thought maybe he was just being polite. But soon she realized he was trying to understand her, the quiet intern who had spotted what an entire department had missed. One afternoon, he invited her into his office, not for an update, but just to talk. "You remind me of someone," he said, leaning back in his chair. "My wife. She used to notice things other people didn't. She had this way of paying attention to the world that made you feel like nothing slipped past her." She wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't talk about his wife much, but she had heard whispers in the office about the accident, about how he had been raising his young son alone since then. "She would have liked you," he added softly, almost to himself. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but she could feel something shifting between them. He no longer saw her as just another temporary intern. There was a quiet respect in his tone now, a recognition that she had played a part in protecting something he had built and cared for. A few days later, she met his son by accident. She had stayed late to finish a report, and the boy had come into the office with his father, holding a sketchbook under one arm. "This is my helper," the CEO said with a small smile, introducing them. The boy was shy at first, but when he noticed her looking at his drawings, his face lit up. She leaned down to see them, asking gentle questions. Within minutes, he was telling her all about his favorite animals and the stories he made up about them. As she listened, she caught a glimpse of the CEO standing a few feet away, watching them. His expression was different, softer, almost relieved. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment, she was no longer just the intern who had written a warning on a folded piece of paper. She had become part of something far more personal. The investigation into the fraud continued quietly, but the everyday rhythm of the office started to return. People still whispered in corners, but the tension had softened a little. The CEO was handling things carefully, keeping most of the details behind closed doors, protecting the company from panic. For her, life inside the building had changed in small but noticeable ways. She found herself speaking to him more often, sometimes for work, sometimes for no reason at all. A quick question about a project could turn into a 10-minute conversation about music or books or the city's best coffee. She was still reserved, still soft-spoken, but with him, she didn't feel the need to hide her thoughts as much. His son, too, had taken a liking to her. Every so often, he would appear in the office after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. If she was at her desk, he'd stop by to show her a new drawing or ask if she'd thought of any new animal story ideas for him. She didn't realize it at first, but these moments began to matter to the CEO. His son had been quiet and withdrawn for a long time after his mother's passing. Most people he met were polite, but distant. But with her, the boy opened up. One rainy Friday evening, the office was nearly empty when she finished her work. As she was packing up, the CEO walked past her desk. "Heading out?" he asked. She nodded. "Just finished." "Come with us," he said without hesitation. "We're going for pizza. My son's favorite place." She started to decline. Politeness told her she shouldn't intrude, but the boy's hopeful grin made her pause. "Please?" he asked. And just like that, she found herself sitting in a cozy little restaurant, the smell of fresh bread and melted cheese in the air. The boy chattered happily, showing her how he folded paper napkins into strange shapes. The CEO mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment, but you could tell he was watching the two of them more than anything. It felt natural, easy. At one point, while the boy was busy drawing a pizza dragon in his sketchbook, the CEO leaned toward her slightly. "You've done more than you realize," he said quietly. She looked at him, confused. "You didn't just protect this company," he continued. "You've given him someone to talk to, someone he feels safe with. That's rare." Her throat felt tight, and she didn't know what to say. She had only ever thought of herself as the quiet observer, the person who stayed on the edges. Yet here she was, somehow, in the middle of something important, not just in a boardroom, but in someone's life. When the evening ended, the boy insisted she take the small dragon drawing he'd made. She tucked it carefully into her bag, not realizing then how much it would mean to her later. The following weeks brought slow but steady changes. The investigation reached its final stage, and though most employees didn't know the details, word quietly spread that the person responsible for the fraud was gone. It wasn't a loud scandal, no police walking through the office, no public drama. The CEO had handled it with care, protecting the company's reputation while making sure the damage stopped for good. For her, it still felt strange to think that it had all started with a simple folded note. She had never meant to be in the center of anything. She had just seen something wrong and couldn't ignore it. One Monday morning, she arrived at work to find an envelope on her desk. Inside was a short letter from the CEO, thanking her personally for what she had done. Along with it was an offer. Her internship would become a full-time position, starting immediately. She read the letter twice before she could fully take it in. It wasn't just a job offer. It was proof that her quiet instincts, the ones she had sometimes seen as a weakness, were in fact her greatest strength. Later that day, the CEO stopped by her desk with his son in tow. The boy handed her a small framed copy of the Pizza Dragon drawing, smiling proudly. "We thought you should have this," the CEO said. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts can change the biggest things. Her eyes stung, and she had to blink quickly before anyone noticed. She thanked them softly, not trusting her voice to say more. From then on, she wasn't just the quiet intern in the corner. People knew her name. They sought her out for advice, for help, for her sharp eye that noticed things others missed. But she didn't change who she was. She still preferred listening to talking, still liked the small desk by the window, still carried herself with the same quiet steadiness. As for the CEO, his gratitude went beyond the office. Every now and then, he and his son would invite her to join them for dinner, or to see a new art exhibit, or simply to walk through the park. Over time, these moments became less about saying thank you and more about simply sharing life. She had stepped into their world by accident, through a whisper of a warning. And yet, that whisper had been enough to protect a company, earn a friend's trust, and make a difference in a child's life. It reminded her of something her father had told her long ago. Bravery doesn't always need a stage or an audience. Sometimes it's as simple as paying attention and having the courage to act when it matters most. And so life went on. The rain still fell on the city streets, the office still buzzed with its daily routine, and she still worked quietly at her desk. But now, she knew that even in the quietest corners, someone could make an impact big enough to be felt far beyond the walls around them.